Can everybody hear me? It delays, I guess. Well, I preached here a few weeks ago, and it was my first time, and it felt a little strange. But if y'all all liked it, I guess I did okay. So, or at least I was able to get out of the way. I try to be very conscious of getting out of the way and letting the Holy Spirit work in me. And you know, that's really hard to do sometimes, but I'm trying. And so I went through about 2 or 3 different topics to talk about as in the last few weeks, and this is something that I did a Bible study on this a few months back, and it just really kind of speaks to me every time I think about the text that we're going to talk about today. You know, it's in the Old Testament. You know, I know there's some folks that don't really go for the Old Testament, some churches, but you know, let's just call it what it is. They're crazy because the whole Bible is good from start to finish. And I also, when I'm preaching or teaching the Bible, I try to throw a little bit of old and some new in there so you can kind of see how it all connects together, because not only is it good from start to finish, it all connects. Pretty amazing how that works. Almost like it was planned to be that way. Maybe it was planned to be that way. So today we're going to, you've got your order of worship. If you'll turn into Daniel 4, starting in verse 28. I know that's kind of a longer passage, but we're actually going to talk about much more than just that passage, so I just didn't send that in. There's so much more to it. But we'll go ahead and read that. I don't hear any pages turned, so I'm going to read from the Holman Christian Standard Bible, or Hardcore Southern Baptist, whichever one you may have heard. Starting in verse 28. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, as he was walking on the roof of the royal palace in Babylon, the king exclaimed, "Is this not Babylon the Great that I have built by my vast power to be a royal residence and to display my majestic glory?" My majestic glory, right? While the words were still in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven. "King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared that the kingdom has departed from you. You will be driven away from the people to live with the wild animals, and you will feed on grass like cattle for 7 periods of time until you acknowledge the Most High as ruler of the kingdom of men, and he gives it to anyone he wants." At that moment, the sentence against Nebuchadnezzar was executed. He was driven away from people. He ate grass like cattle, and his body was drenched with dew from the sky until his hair grew like eagle's feathers and his nails like bird's claws. But at the end of those days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven, and my sanity returned to me. Then I praised the Most High and honored and glorified him who lives forever, for his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are counted as nothing, and he does nothing. And he does what he wants with the army of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. There is no one who can hold back his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At that time, my sanity returned to me, and my majesty and splendor returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisors and my nobles sought me out. I was reestablished over my kingdom, and even more greatness came to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and glorify the King of heaven, because all his works are true and his ways are just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride. So I guess walking in pride is not really a good thing, is it? If you read that. You know, there's a lot of, the whole Bible is full of stories of people that thought that they were just great and what they were doing was great, and look at all the great things that I'm doing, or oh God, I know you want to do this, but I don't really want to do this. I want to go do this instead. And then every time without fail, what does God do to them? to use some more current language, he smacks them down. He takes them out. He's not going to allow them to walk in pride. So before I get too far off my notes that I took so much time to put together, I have a real bad tendency of doing that. I'm just shooting from the hip. It works sometimes. Clearly you've asked me to come back, so it worked last time. But we'll try to stick with this. They don't teach you in seminary exactly how to put a sermon together that's going to work for you. They give you all these examples, and you have to sort of pick, well, maybe I like this, and then just do your own thing anyway. So we'll stick with it. I did some studying recently about faith. You were saved by faith. It's faith alone, and it carries us back to Abraham. So I was thinking about Abraham when I was preparing this, and Abraham was a man that he didn't have a Bible. They didn't have any written scriptures that we know of, because this is 430 years before the law was given to Moses. But he had faith in God. And even though he was an old man, he was 100 years old, and his wife had never had children. She was old. He thought, no, God said he's going to make a nation. He can do that. I had that faith. But even in the face of that, he still did his own thing. He still, God's going to give me a child, so I'm going to take my wife's maidservant. He did his own plan, and what happens to that? It just messes things up. So I really thought a lot about that, and how Abraham did it. You think of Jonah did it. Anyone that goes out and walks in pride, God's going to humble you. And then I thought again of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was the emperor over the most powerful nation at the time in the world, Babylon. Babylon the Great. He built the Hanging Gardens. You may have read somewhere about the Hanging Gardens. He built it for his wife. He's a powerful man. He's got all these resources. He wants to show his wife something nice. So instead of going down to the FTD and getting her a dozen roses, he built her a Hanging Gardens. So I guess that's kind of equivalent. If I had, maybe I could build a Hanging Gardens for my wife. But he had all of these resources, and he came out one day on his rooftop and said, "Look at everything that I've done." But he didn't do that without a warning. If you go back to the text, and we go back all the way to verse 28, it says all this happened. Well, what happened? So go back a little bit before that to verse 24. The interpretation. It was the interpretation, and even before that, Daniel was called in verse 19 to interpret the dream. But the whole of chapter 4 is kind of where we're going. He had this dream. He had this dream of this really beautiful tree that grew so high and was so green, and the fruit, and it touched heaven. And then a messenger came down from heaven and cut the tree down. Obviously, that's kind of concerning. Why would you cut down this beautiful tree? Daniel, come on in here and tell me what happened. And Daniel came in and said, well, I'd really like to tell you that this dream is about your enemies, but it's not. It's about you. You're that tree, and you're going to be cut down. And he didn't really give him a time frame, but go back to verse 29. It's at the end of 12 months. So he was warned, if you don't fix yourself, I'm going to humble you. And then that's exactly what happened. So today, we're going to talk about how we can try to see warning signs in our lives, but ultimately, if we try to be like Nebuchadnezzar and say, look at everything that I've done. If I stepped out on my front porch and said, look at the, well, I haven't mowed my yard yet, so I can't really say anything. After I mow my yard today, I look at it and say, look at this yard that I have mowed and how beautiful it is. If I'm doing that, and I'm not saying, God, look at this beautiful yard you gave me, and this tractor you gave me so I don't have to push my way, or that would be the wrong thing to do, to not give God the credit for that. So today we're going to talk about, and I do have 3 points, so I'll try to stick with those, when God humbles you. The first thing that you'll see when God humbles you is He sets a schedule. You know, He may not have given Nebuchadnezzar or Daniel the answers to the schedule, but he gave him a dream. And he said, look, this tree is you, and I'm going to cut it down because look how great it is. And he told him, look, if you go back to the actual interpretation of the dream, in verse 24, he said, this is the interpretation, Your Majesty, and this is the sentence of the Most High that has been passed against my lord the king. You will be driven away from people to live with wild animals. Now he was told that, and he wasn't really told, but if you turn from this, it's not going to happen. But we see in Jonah when he was told, hey, look, you're going to go over to I think, I can't, the name of the place escapes me. That's really bad, but I think it's Nineveh. He said, hey, you guys are a bad, bad place, and I'm gonna wipe you out. When they heard that word, that was their warning. What do? Every last one of them stripped their clothes and put on sackcloth. The king stripped his clothes, put on sackcloth, and sat in ashes. Everything he could do, everything that they could do to humble themselves, and they changed. They turned from that. So it would have been obvious to Nebuchadnezzar, look, if God's warning you to fix yourself, fix yourself. And I'm not going to, he's not going to punish you if you're not doing anything wrong, necessarily. And we won't go into the whole, we're all sinners and we all deserve. That's a different sermon for another day. But if God is warning you about something in your life that's wrong, you have to stop it. So you understand what's going on. You look back there about the dream, what was going on in the dream. In verse 25, he was given the timetable. This is after, he didn't really do that there. Forward is, it's going to last you this long. And then go forward to verse 29. So at the end of 12 months, he didn't fix himself. So God told him what was happening. His problem was he was taking control and authority for himself. To apply that to us, how often do we do that? You go to work every day. Do you take control of yourself? You think, well, I got to do this and I got to do that. And think about it in a day when you end your day. How many times you look back and how many times you say, well, I got to do, and look what I've done, and my this, all the things that point at yourself. And how many times you give God the glory for that. There's a term for that, and it's called secularism. And all that means is that you're more concerned with what's going on here, and you're not looking up. Not to get ahead of myself, but ultimately, that's all Nebuchadnezzar had to do was look up. When you go out and you see what a great job you did mowing your yard, or my wife makes cakes once in a while for kids' birthdays. We look at that cake. Look at this cake that I made. It's great. All you got to do is recognize that God gave you the abilities and the talents to do those things. Everything Nebuchadnezzar had was because God gave him the ability. He ordained him to be the most powerful man in the world. It wasn't that way because he had anything all by himself. So he had some secret power. No, God was ordaining that to happen. The mentality that we're good enough on our own and we don't need God somehow, that's just the world creeping in telling you that. We live in a place, and it's really sad to see, and I don't want to talk about politics or anything like that, but it's really sad. I work for the government. I'm part of the fighting arm of the government. And it's really sad to see, because I have a connection with all of the men that have gone before me and women that have gone before me and given their lives, whether in death or just sacrificed, some happiness sometimes, or sacrificed being able to go spend all the time with their family. When my daughter was 6 months old, I had to leave for an entire year. I missed a whole year of her life from the time she was 6 months to a year and a half. And that's a hard thing to sacrifice, and I gave that up. And I think of all the men that gave that up in the past, and I see what's happening in our country. We just seem to forget that. And the reason we forget that is because we think we don't need God. We can do this ourselves. Look what we've got. Look how powerful we are. And Nebuchadnezzar did the same thing. And at the end of 12 months, he was walking out on the roof doing that very same thing. And immediately, God took him down. He gives us warning throughout Scripture. So you can think about your own life. If you're in a situation where maybe you're not being as humble, wonder if God has given you a warning. It was pretty clear to Nebuchadnezzar what his warning was, because he had a dream. He had Daniel to interpret that dream. It wouldn't be so simple for us, but you can still see where God is warning you. He does not want us to be conceited, to be looking at ourselves as if we're the ones in power. You don't have to turn to all these verses. I have a few verses in my point. You don't have to turn to them. I'll just tell you what they are, and you can write them down so you can look at them later. I didn't mark my Bible where all these were, so I just wrote them down. In Psalm 75:5, it says, "Do not lift up your horn on high, or speak with a haughty neck." Don't lift your own horn up. And look what I can do. The reference there is, kind of playing an instrument. I play the trumpet, and I was pretty good at it in high school. That's been a couple of years ago. But don't think that I did that myself, that's because I'm any good at it. That's because God gave me a talent to read music and understand how to play an instrument. And I can play it. That's it. So it's not because of Jake, it's because God gave that to me. And don't speak with a haughty neck. Don't go around, look at everything that I can do. I can play my trumpet, or, Brother Steve, he plays that piano pretty good. I couldn't look at that thing all day and make it make one sound that sounded good. But don't think that Brother Steve has that talent because he's got that. God gave him that talent to do that. Right? So he will call on you. So watch out. He will call on you out there. God does not want us to speak of our own accomplishments as if it's all of our doing. The psalmist is pretty clear about doing that. He's pretty clear that that's not the way we need to be doing. In Proverbs 6:16 through 17, it's a whole list of everything that God hates. And at the top of that list, haughty eyes. So out of everything that God hates, he gives us an entire list over in the Proverbs. I hate this, I hate that. The very first thing he hates is haughty eyes. So if you think about that, that's probably something we should avoid, right? Haughty eyes. Don't be what God hates the most. Nebuchadnezzar walked out on the roof and he did exactly that. He looked at his hanging gardens. He looked at all of everything that he had made with his own hands, and forgot about the fact that it was God gave him the ability to do that. Think of all the leaders we have in the world today that do the very same thing. They forget the fact that they're in place because God ordained them to be there. They're not given credit to any, even if you don't believe in God, you have to understand that you don't have what you have because you just have it, and it's not from anything. It's obvious. But you turn over to Romans chapter 1, it talks about, you know enough about God from which you open your eyes and see to know that he is there and know that he's given you that. And the only reason people don't acknowledge that is because they just don't want to accept that truth. But it is still the truth. And even in Nebuchadnezzar's case, it was true. We have to be slaves. We all know what slaves are. Our country is marked with a really bad time where we had slaves. We took people from their homes, we shoved them into ships, and we brought them over here. And why did we do that? We did that so that they could work for us, do what we wanted to do. And that's a horrible, horrible thing to have done. But in that horrible thing to do, we as Christians, we can look at that and realize that's the relationship that we want to have with God. Except that when we become slaves to him and slaves to Christ, as Paul referred to himself, it's not the bad thing that we've done. The thing about people is we'll take something that's great, a great picture of something, and we'll just really mess it up. We'll turn it as bad as we possibly can. But the idea is being slaves to Christ and slaves to God is we aren't working for our own glory. We don't work for ourselves, we work for God. The last time I came here, I remember that sign that you have. You were going out in the mission field. We're working for that. We're not working to make a great church so we can come here and we can sit and look at this great church that we've got. We're doing that so we can come in here and get energized and learn about God's Word and then get up and go out and tell somebody else about it. I wasn't going to say this, but today we had the promotion Sunday. Kids all promoted up to the next grade in Sunday school, and I was talking to somebody that they had gone to Birmingham, on 59 in Birmingham, when you're just out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. There's a sign on the side of the road that says, "Remember, hell is hot." Why did I say that? Because the whole point is giving God the glory and doing what God wants for us to do, because hell is hot and we don't want anybody to go there. I don't want anybody to go there. They will. Because invariably they won't listen. They'll do what they want to do and they will go there. But if I can help it, I'm going to help as many people not go there as possible, because it's hot. Nebuchadnezzar's defense was he gave glory only to himself. I read a quote that says, "We know how earthly kings desire, by all means in their power, to bury the glory of others, with the view of exalting themselves and acquiring perpetual reputation." He just wanted to build his own reputation. He was looking for his own reputation. I studied some of the encyclopedias and biblical encyclopedias, and I read about where archaeologists have dug up Babylon. That's over in Iraq, over in like the Baghdad area. Amazing, such a great kingdom and nation that was so influential that it was in Iraq. And I've been to Iraq, and I don't see it. I don't see the greatness there, but maybe back then it was. But they've dug up Babylon. They've looked at bricks, just hundreds and hundreds of bricks that they've dug up from where Nebuchadnezzar had built, and he stamped his name on them. Imagine suppressing someone else's glory so much that the very bricks that you build with, you've stamped your own name on. So I mean, it was really way more than just he walked out on his roof one day and said, "Look at everything that I've done." He had been warned in an entire year. He didn't get any better. He got worse. And God took him out. The lengths that he went to suppress everyone else's glory, and that even the glory of God. But now, in the middle of the story, notice the contrast. He was warned. But every time Daniel interpreted a dream, he gave Nebuchadnezzar the picture. Look, God is helping me interpret this dream. I am not doing this. God is doing that. So even in the warning, he had the example of what to do. And Daniel giving God that glory. We got to give credit where it's due. And our credit is not due to ourselves. All of our many blessings. I have a beautiful family. I have a nice place to live. I have a car that can get me here. I don't have to worry about. I have all these things. It's not for anything that I have done. It's because God gave that to me. There was a time though when I did not do that. It's easy to sit here now and look back over my life and see all the nudges and the pushes that God has done over my life to get me here. But there was a time when it was when I left home for the first time. I was that kid. I was my kid. I'm dragging him to church. Not always kicking and screaming, thank you, but I was that kid. I didn't want to go to church. It's Sunday. I want to sleep in. So when I had the first opportunity I could, I took off. I didn't go to church. That's when I joined the Marine Corps. I spent a good many years. I'm not really sure what I was doing. I don't really know what my goal was, but ultimately it wasn't to serve God. It wasn't to do what He wanted me to do. To be a part of a church and making disciples, and it wasn't that. It was doing my own thing. It was, let's see what Jake can do. And then one day, God humbled me. But now I can look back over that time and see all the warning signs. But He humbled me. And incidentally, after He humbled me and I did the right thing, He came back. that's when I met my wife. So the good thing is, I tell you that because when you're humble, there's always going to be a good end to it if you look up. We're going to get there. We're not there yet. So, but when God humbles you, He'll humble you as much as He needs in order to show us His authority. So He sets the schedule, and He tells you how much it's going to be and how long it's going to be. Can you think of a time in your life when God has humbled you? I don't know y'all that well, but I've been in churches before without a pastor, so I have an idea of how it feels. It's really not very much fun sometimes, and the tendency is to question things, and unfortunately, people leave and they go other places. We live in a place where I gotta have it now. Unfortunately, that's part of the secularism. I gotta have it now. We don't want to be patient and let God work in His time. This is just humbling. I hope maybe, and I pray that something feels pretty good. We just got to look at God and just let Him go as long as He's going to go. For me, the humbling was very short. It was really only a couple of days' time when I felt like I had literally hit the bottom. He showed me, you cannot do it by yourself. And for me, it was get to that church that's right over there. And I have driven past it every day. And only if I had known what I should have, I knew what I should have been doing. If only I had done it earlier. But the thing is when God humbles you, He does it as much as you need. For me, it was the bottom of the barrel. And it was as long as it needed. It only needed to be a few days. It needed to be just long enough for me to open my eyes and see where I needed to go. For Nebuchadnezzar, he was the most powerful man in the world. It had to be as low as it could possibly be. My bottom of the barrel was, I still had my health, I still had my job, I still had the blessings that God had given me, but it was an emotional bottom. For Nebuchadnezzar, well, let's read it. It was at the end of 12 months. He said these things. God said, I'm taking you down. And while the words were still in the king's mouth, while they were still in his mouth, the voice from heaven declared, the kingdom is departed from me. He took his kingdom. What's the worst thing you could do to a king? Take his kingdom. So, he took his kingdom. That's one. You will be driven away from people. He spent his life governing people, ruling them. And but by and large, if you read all the way up to this point in Daniel, you read about Nebuchadnezzar. He wasn't a bad ruler. He overall, he was, as people go, and as the human definition of good, he was a good guy. Most of the things, like the fiery furnace, he didn't just, I think I'll just pass a law where everybody's got to worship me. He was sort of tricked into that. So he clearly wasn't that smart. He didn't see what they were trying to do to him, but he was around people and ruling them. So God took away his kingdom and took him away from people. And what else did he do? To live with wild animals. So here's a person who, you imagine they probably didn't take a lot of baths back then. He probably had baths all the time. He was clean. He lived in a palace. He had fine clothes. He was ruling people. He had a kingdom. That's gone. He likes to rule people. That's gone. And then God sent him into the pasture with the wild animals. And he was eating grass. So imagine being one of his subjects. Not only did he deal with, he's as low as he could possibly be and still be living and breathing. The people who would walk, imagine walking by and seeing Nebuchadnezzar out in the field going, that's Nebuchadnezzar over there. He was the king. What? Is he eating grass? Oh my goodness. This is the level that God took him to. God will humble you as much as you need to. For a man like Nebuchadnezzar being as high as you can get and still be here on earth, he took him to as low as he could get. And then how long did he do that? It was a period of 7 periods. There's not a whole lot of doubt that 7 periods means 7 years. You can read and study that all you like. The word just means 7 periods. We have to kind of guess that it means 7 years. So you think about, in Nebuchadnezzar's case, he was so high, so he had to go so many. If it had only been 7 days, would that have gotten the point across to him? No. 7 months. That may have made a dent in his heart. It changed him a little bit, but then you got to think about the lesson for everyone else. 7 months may not have had as big of an impact on everyone else. So 7 years fits that. More than 7 years, it would have been so long people would have forgotten. They would have walked by and seen Nebuchadnezzar running around in the pasture with the ox. They would have forgotten. Who's that crazy guy? There have been a lot. So it has to be for the right amount of time, and that's God's schedule to do that. You know, he wasn't given God the glory, so God took it away from him. You know, he brings down the area. Another verse that you can write down is Psalm 18:27. And the New American Standard is what I wrote down here because I like the word there. But haughty eyes you abase. So we just learned that in Proverbs, haughty eyes are the most hated thing God has. And he abases them. And the reason I like the New American Standard is because I like that word, abase. It's such an odd word, but it really speaks to what's happened. And what will happen to you. It happened to Nebuchadnezzar, and it'll happen to you. And whatever it is it's going to take for you to be abased, that's what God will do to you. Because haughty eyes are his most hated. James 4:6, he stands in opposition to the proud, and he gives grace to the humble. It says, and I wrote this in all capital letters because it's really emphasis. God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. He's opposed to the proud. You don't be proud. Be humble. I don't know if I've talked about this before, but I have talked about it before, but not with you guys. In the Marine Corps, we have leadership traits, leadership principles. It's all about being a leader. And being a leader, it's good to be a leader. At any level you are in the Marine Corps, you're a leader. Well, in the officer training, they teach them, don't be humble. Of all your leadership traits, and there's this big long acronym for 14 leadership traits about having integrity and being justice and all those things, but don't be humble. You can't be a good leader and not be humble. Because if you're only looking for yourself, you're not looking out for other people. If you're looking out for God's glory, the humility in that is looking out for other people. God is opposed to the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. 1 Peter 5:5 says the same thing. So if that's 2 verses in the Bible that says the same thing, that's probably important if God repeated it to us. And then if you go back to the fact that he hates haughty eyes and he abases haughty eyes, that might be kind of important to remember. Pride will be humble, period. It's not any time you can think, well, I'll just be prideful. It'll be okay. I'll just a little bit longer, just till I get through this next season, or I get through this next big project, or what. No. God didn't tell Nebuchadnezzar, hey, look, I'm warning you. We'll give you 12 months to do it. He warned him. And then he did it in his time. He's not going to give you time to do that. If you're prideful, you will be humbled. That's it. There's really no other way to say that. We could stop now, but we're not. Because I'm going to keep going. He's not going to stand for us to be proud. He's not going to stand for that. I mean, God is great. God is good. Let us thank him for our food, but at the end of the day, he does not want us to take his glory. In being perfectly righteous, he has to be glorified. So he can't stand for you to be proud. And in Nebuchadnezzar, I can't imagine the level that went to. For my own self, it was where I needed to go. For you, it's where you need to go. The lesson here is, if you haven't already been humbled, it's going to happen. I ride a motorcycle. And the first thing they told me when I got my bike, they said, okay, there's 2 kinds of motorcycle riders. There's those that have fallen down, and those that haven't fallen down yet. I've fallen down. but I'm probably going to fall down again. That's just like life. If you're prideful, if you get prideful when I'm on that motorcycle, I'm not going to see that F-250 that moved over to my lane. If you're prideful, you're not going to see what's coming at you. You have to humble yourself and you'll see it. And you know what? Just like the Ninevites, if you see it and you humble yourself, you may not have to be the punishment. The humbling can be your punishment. For them it was. Nebuchadnezzar didn't see it. He didn't see the writing on the wall. Incidentally, if you want to have a really good story, read a couple of chapters later. It's like Nebuchadnezzar's grandson literally did see the writing on the wall. The hand appeared and wrote on. Amazing story, because it's true. A hand appeared. You have to just see. And God is going to show you what He needs to show you, and for as long as He needs to show you. For me, it wasn't very long. For Nebuchadnezzar, it was 7 years. For you, it would be something else. However long it needs to be, and however far it needs to be. When God humbles you, last point, I promise. When God humbles you, He sets the schedule. He does it for as much and as long as He needs to. And the only way out is to acknowledge God's authority and His sovereignty. Sovereignty is a word we don't really understand so much in our country because we don't have a sovereign ruler. You know, the president, as much as some of them in the past have wanted to be sovereign, they're not sovereign. 8 years, they're out. End of story. So we don't really understand sovereignty the way they would have. Nebuchadnezzar had the wrong idea about sovereignty. He was looking at his own sovereignty. He wasn't looking at God's sovereignty. The only way out of God's abasing your haughty eyes is to acknowledge His authority and His sovereignty. It's simple. But I find myself thinking, is it really that simple? I mean, what is God looking for? What's He looking for from us? It seems like there's got to be some big thing that He's looking for from us. I mean, is it really just enough to acknowledge God? We'll go to the Bible and we'll see what it says. Verse 34. But at the end of those days, those 7 periods, at the end of those days, now right here, incidentally, in verse 34, that's Nebuchadnezzar talking. Daniel wrote this. He's quoting Nebuchadnezzar. But at the end of those days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven. So he looked up to heaven. And what happened next? And my sanity returned to me. That's it. All you got to do is acknowledge God. You are abased. What are you going to do? You're going to wallow in it? Oh, I'm abased. What am I going to do? This is so horrible. All you have to do, and it's just that simple, is lift your eyes to heaven. Because God will do the rest. We can't save ourselves. We're all dead in our trespasses. We can't save ourselves. All we have to do is look to Christ, and we're saved. It's easy. John 3, I think it's like 17 or 18. So in that area, it says, just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness. I'll never forget the verse because my son had to memorize it for school, but just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, the children of Israel, they're out in the desert and they're complaining, for goodness sakes. I mean, He's given them manna every day. They're not going to have to worry about what they're going to eat. He's with them. He's over their tabernacle. They can see the pillar of fire at night. They can see the clouds, and they can see God's presence in their life. I cannot just open my eyes and see it just like this microphone. That's really close, I should notice that. Yeah, I can see it right there. They can see God in their life just like that right there. And what do they do with it? They complain. Oh, it's so awful here in the desert. Our clothes aren't getting worn out because some supernatural. They didn't have to wear clothes. They didn't have to stay. Food on the ground. They complain. So God sent a bunch of snakes after them. And I don't like snakes. Oh, it's just a rat snake. It's a snake. Okay. If you're a snake and you're in my yard, you are asking me to take my shovel out of it. That's it. It's a snake. So they've got snakes swarming all over it. And the snakes are biting. These aren't poisonous snakes. They're biting them. And what are they doing? They're dying. So what did God do? He abased them. Probably the most fearful thing that they could have, because they all knew about Adam. They knew about the snake. They're looking at snakes, and this is horrible. So what did God do? All right, Moses. I've heard them. They're crying out to me. Just take this stick, put a serpent on it, and tell them all they have to do is look up at it. All you have to do is look up. You don't have to say some fancy prayer. I'm going to say that you don't even have to come to church to do it. You can be wherever you're going to be. Nebuchadnezzar was in the field, could have had a mouthful of grass at the time, chewing on it, because that's what he'd been eating. His hair was long, his nails, he was looking pretty rough. And all he had to do was lift his eyes to heaven. All you have to do is lift your eyes to heaven. God's not asking for anything from us except give him the glory. That's it. It is that simple. He doesn't want anything from us. And we drove through Texas, and we saw this huge church downtown. I remember I was stationed in Memphis, Bellevue Baptist Church. That's the first big church I'd ever seen. It was so big, I thought it was a mall. It looks like a mall. It is a church. God doesn't care. This is the size of the church that I was saved in. It didn't take a mega church because the church isn't what does it. It's the Holy Spirit. It's Christ. And it's God ordering everything. He doesn't want huge churches. He doesn't care about big building funds. All he wants us to do is look up. The most powerful man in the most powerful kingdom in the world at the time. He didn't look up. And he lost his kingdom, he lost his people, and he lost his mind. And all he had to do was look up. And he did. So how long did it take for him to get it back? Instantly. At the same time. It says it right there. Well, it says it right there. Then I praised the Most High and honored him and glorified him and lives forever. And then skip forward to verse 36. At that time, what time? When I lifted my eyes to heaven. At that time, my sanity returned to me, and my majesty and splendor returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisors, my nobles sought me out. They were no longer making fun of me. They were seeking him out. This is the guy we need to go to for answers. And all he had to do was look up. All you have to do is look up. It's tough times. But look up. Romans 13:1, if you will write that down. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of God. The powers that be ordained of God. There is no power anywhere. It's kind of like if you're living in a town, you go in smaller towns and have a power station. I've lived in those places, I've driven through. They got one place that they get their power from. If you build a house in there and you don't plug into that power, you're in the dark. God is that power station for us, all of us, whether you believe in him or not. It says it right there, for there is no power but of God. He is the power. It's the only power. When Nebuchadnezzar decided that, he could build his mighty kingdom. He could do all this stuff. But he made a mistake because he didn't plug into the power station. It's not saying you can't be satisfied with what you're doing. You can live a life and you can feel fairly satisfied. I've said it before, it's all like we have this big Jesus-shaped hole in our heart. Just because you don't fill it with Jesus doesn't mean it feels like it's filled up sometimes. People are shoving stuff in left and right, trying to figure it out, trying to do it. And they'll feel satisfied some of the time, but they'll never be completely satisfied. They'll never be fulfilled. It's like the song, Make Me Whole. They'll never be whole. They'll only be partly. We just have to look up. If you look up to God and give him glory, He's not going to humble you. If you look to Christ, He's going to save you. If you look to the Holy Spirit, He'll guide you. And that's all that you really have to worry about. Just don't look at what you're doing and thinking how great it is what you've done. A lot of speculation at the end of this passage that whether or not Nebuchadnezzar became, they didn't have that terminology back, became saved. Whether or not he'll be in heaven one day. I believe he will be in heaven. I believe I'll get to meet him one day. And I'll ask him, what were you thinking? You know? I mean, how did it feel being out in that pasture? How do I know that he's going to be there? Because he looked up to heaven and he gave God the glory. And he put God before any other God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. And that's what Nebuchadnezzar did. And it only took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the fiery furnace, to point him in the right direction. And, oh, by the way, I'm going to cut you off at the stump. But I'm not going to kill the stump, because I can give it back to you. You know, we labor hard to try to make it happen. And all we have to do is look up. Another verse, and then I'll close. Matthew 10:32. Therefore, everyone who confesses me before men, I will also confess him before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I will also deny him before my Father who is in heaven. Confess Christ, you're good. If you don't, then you're not good. Christ will deny you. We're turning away from God. It's sad. The world is not looking to God. Even our country, we came over here, 1700s, try to make a better place for religious freedom. But even then, they were turning away from God. If you read of some of the men that came to make this a better nation, they weren't even following God like they should have. Do some reading on some of these men. It's a little scary, but they came over here with the right idea. Religious freedom. We're free to believe in God as we want, as we need, as the Bible tells us to. And for a while it was good, but the world starts to creep in. That secularism starts to come in there. We don't need that. The world is going to corrupt us. We don't glorify God as if He's in control. We don't understand that nothing here happens that's not ordered and ordained by Him. I think a lot about this every day that I no longer turn on the TV and watch the news, the election coverage. I just can't stand to do it. Because ultimately, if I understand that, you know, skip next to the next chapter in Daniel at 5:23, at the end, but you have not glorified the God who holds your life breath in His hand and who controls the whole course of your life. Why should I worry so much about elections and news? And God holds my life breath in His hand. I used to love it when I was a kid singing that song. He's got the whole world in His hands. I mean, He's got the whole world in His hands. I can sing a little bit. You okay? Not every time. He's got the whole world in His hands. And more than that, He controls the whole course of your life. What are you going to do with that? Another verse. I love the Bible. 2 Chronicles 7:13 and 14. If I close the sky so there is no rain, or if I command the grasshopper to consume the land, or if I send pestilence on my people who are called by my name, humble themselves, pray and seek my face, and turn from their evil ways, then I will hear from heaven, forgive their sin, and heal their land. It didn't say it's going to take anything other than humble yourself and seek His face. And to seek His face, all you got to do is look up. Why do we give credit to somebody else? To apply this to believers, I mean, We get off track sometimes, don't we? Life gets in the way. There's a lot going on in my life. I think since the last time I came in here, I was pretty well told to retire. That's a big change. That's part of the plan. That's part of Jake's plan to go to seminary. But guess what happened? God said, wait a second, you're planning too much. You're not acknowledging me. You're planning on your own. Abraham did it. Jonah did it. Nebuchadnezzar did it. Jake does it. Did you do that? Believer, if you're doing that, God will fix that wrong mindset, whether you like it or not. But there's hope, because you already have Christ. All you have to do is look up. All you have to do is look up. That's it. And I'm not going to assume that everyone here is a Christian, because I guess you read statistics, 90% of the people in church are Christians, so that means the other 10% are searching for Christ. So you may be sitting there and you may not know Christ. And I would be wrong if I didn't say something to you. I'm really trying not to look anybody in the eye. So that's my first time to say that. But look, or you may know somebody that's not a Christian. For them, there's no hope at the end of this. When God abases them, that could be it for them. But you can still look up. You can still fix it. Just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. And why is he lifted up? So that you can look at him. And if you look at him, that's you know he is going to save me from it. So whether you're a believer or not a believer, God's going to humble you. He controls everything, whether you believe in him or not. So what are you going to do with that? I guess we're going to have a time where you can respond. I've always liked, I don't know what it is about these stairs down here. Sometimes when you come down here, get on your knees on these stairs, there's no power in this. It's just a building, it's carpet, it's probably covering up plywood. There's no power in it. For some reason, when you come forward and you get on your knees and pray, you feel like you're closer to God. Maybe it's because you actually did something for him rather than just not do something. So you can do that. I've never had anybody come forward on me, so if you came to pray, I'll pray with you. First time for everything. If you're that person, you don't know Christ, you should not let a moment pass before you fix that. I met a man the other day at work who grew up in church. His dad was a pastor. He said, I know who Jesus is, and I know that I don't know him. I know I don't have him in my heart. Well, what's the problem? I don't know what the problem is. Well, why don't you fix that? Well, I'm just not ready. In God's timing, that's a dangerous business to be in. So if you don't know Christ, now is the time to fix that. And I'll do what I can. But Christ is the one that's going to do it for you. So we're going to enter that time. I'm sure Brother Steve will play something for us. Whatever the Lord leads you to do, let's do that. And then after that, we'll be doing something. We're Baptists. That's how we roll.
We stand together. We stand. bless you, brother.
The invitation's not over, just because we stopped singing.
The invitation's not over. Did you want to say something else?
No, I was just gonna say that. Just that.
It's never over. And while we're eating, and or before or after, you can certainly go to Brother Jake or others that you may recognize and want to go and share your need for prayer or whatever it is. But you know, you said so many things, and I said I'm going to comment on that. And of course the snake thing, and I always get when he gets shoveling, so we have that problem. But well, sort of. We don't like snakes. I tell you, I don't like snakes, and I don't like roaches. She'll call me to come take care of that roach. I said, what do you mean me? You can take care of it right there, you know? Because they'll fly up at me and stuff, and it just makes me go nuts. I do like frogs and lizards, but that ain't what I was going to tell you. What I was going to tell you is that, and it's going to be a matter of prayer for me, I do watch the news, and I do follow politics, and I think, how are we going to fix this? And, you know, you made it so clear, we don't need to fix it. We're not called to fix it. We're called to look up. And when we as Christians and as the church, when we look up, country's going to be fine. You know, everything is going to fall in place. And if you didn't say anything else, you said that, but you said a lot. You are obviously called to preach, and we're grateful to have you for today. And I don't want to, I'm not trying to build you up. I'm thanking God for you and for your own humility and your testimony.
If you're feeling discouraged with what goes on in our country, read through Kings and Chronicles. There were some, trust me, who we have leading us today, and I've been through, this is the third president. They're nothing compared to what those people had. So if you want to feel uplifted, read how bad they had it. And don't worry, because God installed every one of them. Just like He installed, I'm going to vote for who I want to vote for. And when the election's over, God's man will be in charge because He gave it that way. So what are you going to do? Look up.
I got a note during church. We pass notes around here, so feel free. It says, Steve, don't let anyone leave. Invite all for lunch. Thank you. You've been invited. And before we